What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. In this video, I want to talk to you guys about prepping lessons learned from the war in Ukraine. Now, I haven't seen many prepping channels or any prepping channels talking about this, so I figured it would be good to do a video on it. So everybody's focused on the politics of the war and who's right, who's wrong, and whether we should support Ukraine or not, and whether this is NATO encroachment or whether this is Russian imperialism. Everybody's so focused on that, but nobody's thinking about the lessons learned from this whole situation. And there's a lot of lessons that can be learned, okay, from any war for that matter, but this war in particular is basically giving us the opportunity to view a war on social media, and we can actually see what the Ukrainian soldiers are going through, what the Russian soldiers are going through, what the Ukrainian civilians are going through. We can see it all on social media. Years ago, we couldn't. So there's a lot of things that we can learn from this whole situation. So first of all, this war is a real-life David versus Goliath story, okay? Russia has 3 times the amount of people as Ukraine does. Ukraine's population, I think, is around 40 million. Russia's population is like 140 or 150 million. So that's like 3 to 4 times as many people as Ukraine. And also Russia is a huge country. It's vast. They have so many resources. They have oil, gas, anything you can think of. I mean, Russia is just loaded with natural resources, uranium, gold. I believe one of the world's largest gold mines is actually in Siberia. So Russia is a huge country. They also have a huge military, which is now probably 50% smaller after the war. But they have a massive military nevertheless because of all the equipment from the Soviet Union. Russia inherited all of that equipment from the Soviet Union. And they started out before the war with 10,000 plus tanks in service, and then probably another 5 or 10,000 that can be assembled in long-term storage. Okay, so their military is vastly larger than Ukraine's. Not only conventional military, but Russia has a massive nuclear arsenal that Ukraine doesn't have. Okay, Ukraine doesn't have any nuclear weapons. They gave up all their nuclear weapons in the 90s when they signed the Budapest Memorandum with Russia and the United States. That was under Bill Clinton. Okay, so we promised we would protect Ukraine if Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, and they did. So they don't have any nuclear weapons. Russia does. Russia has tactical nuclear weapons that they can use on Ukraine. They can deliver them from strategic bombers deep inside Russian territory. So Russia can basically attack Ukraine from standoff distances, and Ukraine can't. Okay, Ukraine doesn't have the capability to strike deep into Russia. They don't have strategic bombers. They don't have cruise missiles that can go 2,000 miles. They don't really have much, and they're getting stuff now, but they still don't have the long-range capabilities that Russia has, and they don't have the same amount of manpower. Their population is smaller. Their territory is smaller. Okay, they're surrounded basically on almost all sides by hostile countries. They have Belarus to the north, and then Russia surrounds the entire eastern part of Ukraine. And then you also have the Black Sea, where Russia has their navy. Ukraine doesn't really have much of a navy. So this is a real-life David versus Goliath story, okay? This is the ultimate real-life survival story for the Ukrainian civilians, okay? This is their SHTF. This is their Red Dawn, okay? Here in the United States, a lot of people fantasize about SHTF and Red Dawn and stuff like that. They think it's going to be cool and fun, and we're going to get to, go to battle with marauders. We're going to get to use our kit, and, we're going to be able to teach those marauders a lesson and teach those commies a lesson. But for the Ukrainians, this is real life, okay? This is real life SHTF. This is a real life Red Dawn, okay? They're being invaded by a massive country that wants to literally absorb them and, completely take them over, okay? So this is a real life Red Dawn, okay, for Ukraine. And, for the civilians, it's a real life SHTF. We've seen all of the strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure. Okay, Russia's been trying to destroy the Ukrainian infrastructure, bombing their power grid in the middle of winter. That's like basically an EMP in the middle of winter. This is something that a lot of preppers talk about, and the Ukrainians are living through this. Okay, they're having their real life EMP in the middle of winter. Okay, the Ukrainians are experiencing a real life dark winter. Okay, they lost power in the dead of winter in many cities. They have rolling blackouts still. They still have to ration their electricity. They can't run their electricity 24 hours a day. They have certain periods where they have to shut the grid down. So a lot of Ukrainians have to adapt to that. Okay, just imagine if your local power company said, okay, we're going to be shutting down the electricity every night from 8 p.m. till 6 a.m. the next day. That's what they're living through, guys. That's what they're living through. And here in the United States, we would think that that's unimaginable, that even if we lose power for a couple of hours, people get pissed off and they start complaining. God forbid they can't, watch TV for 3 or 4 hours. They start getting mad. In Ukraine, they're losing their power every night due to rationing of electricity. And, when Russia was really bombarding their power grid in December and January, there were many cities that were completely in the dark for days on end. So it's a real life EMP for them. It's a real life SHTF, real life Red Dawn. Not only are they having to deal with no power, they also have to deal with the winter temperatures while having no power. And they have to deal with an occupying force that's literally trying to take them over and erase their country and absorb their country into Russia and eliminate their entire culture and everything. Okay, so it's a very good case study for us preppers, and we should really study the situation closely from the mindset of a prepper. What can we learn from this? And what can we take away from this war? So one of the big things is hope, okay? By all calculations, Ukraine was supposed to lose this war already. It's been over a year, and many people were thinking that Kiev would fall the first week or two, and Russia was going to take the capital within the first 2 to 3 weeks, and then they would work their way westward and conquer the whole country. And that didn't happen, okay? That was the nightmare scenario, and I honestly thought that was going to happen, and many people in Europe thought that was going to happen, and actually the Polish government was even contemplating moving troops into Western Ukraine in case Kiev was going to fall, because they didn't want Western Ukraine to be controlled by Russia, because Western Ukraine is formerly Polish territory. There's a lot of cities there, including Lviv, that were once Polish. So the Polish government was readying a strike force to go into Western Ukraine to protect it. And this information was revealed by the former Polish defense minister, Radek Sikorski, okay? And so the big message is hope. You know, as bad as the situation might seem initially, there's always hope. And, you know, you have to kind of control your anxiety and control that urge to panic. And you have to quickly form a plan, and you have to persevere. And there's always hope. And as dire as the situation might be, as you can see, look where the Ukrainians are a year later. I mean, if we look at the beginning of this war, you know, like myself and many people thought that Ukraine was going to fall the first week or two. I'll be honest, I thought Ukraine was going to fall. And here we are over a year later, and they've actually taken territory back, and they're about to take more territory back, most likely, in a massive counterattack. So there's always hope, okay? There's always hope in an SHTF situation. You don't want to feel like something is hopeless. Once you get that feeling that something is hopeless and there's no point, that's when you lose, okay? And the Ukrainians never felt that way, including the president of Ukraine. He stayed in the capital even when everybody was telling him to get out, you know, leave the capital. They're going to take the capital. They're going to try to kill you. He stayed there because he knew that, you know, there's always hope, and he didn't want to just leave like that, so he stayed. So there's always hope. As dire of a situation you're in, there's always hope, whether it's an EMP, whether it's a post-nuclear war world, there's always hope, okay? You always have to have that glass is half full mentality, okay? If you are the type of person that sees everything glass half empty, it's going to be tough for you to make it through an SHTF situation. And the Ukrainians, they showed a tremendous amount of hope and positivity in a situation where most Americans would roll up into a ball and cry in the corner of their house. I mean, they're just tough as nails. So hope, you know, hope is a big one. You always have to keep that glimmer of hope alive and stay positive. That's critical, okay? Your mental well-being and staying positive is critical. If you get into this negative cycle, you're gonna be stuck in that, and you're not gonna be productive. You're not gonna survive whatever situation you're in. The next big one is willpower and perseverance. This is something that I talk about a lot. That's why I have the 3 P's, my trademark quote, if you will: prepare, practice, and persevere. There's a reason why I made it prepare, practice, and persevere, because you can have all the survival equipment, you can have all the skills, all the experience. You could be a tier 0 operator with 30 years of experience in war-torn countries. But if you have no perseverance, no willpower, it doesn't matter. All those preps, all that training, all that experience, all those skills are useless. They mean zero if you have no willpower and you cannot persevere through adverse situations. So the Ukrainians were able to persevere through this situation, okay? A massive surprise attack on their country by a huge occupying force, okay? Many Ukrainians were not prepared for that, okay? They got the notice like literally days before Russia was going to invade. Their government told them that, yeah, Russia's about to invade. And some of them reacted differently. Some of them fled to Poland, like 5 million people fled to Poland. And a lot of them stayed. Most of them stayed. Even though their towns were getting shelled by artillery, they stayed because that's their home, you know? And they didn't want to just give it up. So willpower and perseverance are critical. And, the Ukrainians have shown tremendous willpower and perseverance. Like I said, everybody thought they were going to lose. I thought they were going to lose. The odds were stacked against them, and they did not give up no matter what. And that's very admirable, and that's something that we can definitely take away from this war. Also, with the way the war is going, you can see that Russia is having a hard time, okay? If you ask any military analyst or anybody who's like an officer in the military or went to like a war college, if you look at the numbers, Russia should have conquered Ukraine already like last year, like everybody thought they would. Within a few months, 3 to 6 months tops, they should have been able to conquer the whole country, okay, because they have more equipment, more men, and Ukraine, they have older equipment, less equipment. But, here's where the willpower came in. Okay, the Ukrainians know that they're fighting for their survival. They know that if they stop fighting, their country is not going to exist anymore. Okay? And that's the huge difference between Russia and Ukraine in this war. Okay, Ukraine is fighting for their existence. If they stop fighting, that's it. Their country is gone. If Russia stops fighting, nothing's going to happen. So the individual soldier on the ground, it makes a huge difference, especially if you're conscripted. Now, Russia has been using a lot of conscripts, and Ukraine had to conscript a lot because they didn't have a huge standing army. I think before the war, they had like 200,000 men that were professional soldiers, but they conscripted like over 1 million or even more than that. There's a huge difference when you're drafting people to fight in a war. Okay, the reason why you're fighting makes a huge difference, okay? If you're like a 20-year-old Russian kid and you get a draft notice and it says you got to go fight in Ukraine, do you think you're going to have the same willpower and desire and motivation to fight as a 20-year-old Ukrainian that just saw their family get killed in an artillery strike and their neighbor's dog shot by, a Russian soldier, or, some woman in the next town over who got raped by a Russian soldier? Do you think that the motivation is going to be the same? Absolutely not, okay? So willpower is huge in any kind of situation, survival situation, not only in war, but in survival, in SHTF. The willpower is everything, okay? And it goes back to perseverance. You can have all the equipment. Look at Russia. Russia had all the equipment. They had better training, more men, and they still are struggling. And Ukraine was able to take back a lot of land from them. And Ukraine had much less than they had, and Ukraine is doing a much better job. And that's because the Ukrainians are much more motivated, okay? So willpower and perseverance, the power of willpower and perseverance is huge, okay? It's real, okay? And, not just from a military perspective, but even the individual civilian in Ukraine, okay? Could you imagine being in Ukraine right now, close to the front? Your town is getting bombarded every week. You don't know if when you step outside to get groceries, a random artillery shell or a random missile strike is not going to kill you. And you've seen some people in your town get killed already by missiles. Could you imagine living like that on a daily basis, never knowing if there's just going to be a random artillery shell going into your house, or what's going to happen next, or if Putin is just going to use nukes one day? Can you imagine, living that way? And the Ukrainians are doing it, okay? And not only are they doing it, they're happy. They like being in their country, even though their country is being invaded and attacked. They're persevering. They're showing willpower, okay? And the Russians, they wanted to crush their willpower by bombing their cities in the middle of winter. And the civilians have persevered, okay? And they're still there. They're still surviving. They figured out a way. And this goes into the next big lesson, which is adaptability and resourcefulness. We've seen Ukrainian civilians and also the Ukrainian military show tremendous adaptability and resourcefulness. And this is something that's critical in an SHTF situation, okay? you can prepare as much as you want for all different kinds of scenarios, but there's always going to be a scenario that comes up that you're not prepared for. And in that situation, you have to be adaptable. You have to be flexible. You can't be rigid, okay? And the Ukrainians have shown tremendous adaptability on the civilian level. I've seen videos of Ukrainian civilians collecting rainwater, you know, in Mariupol, for example. When Mariupol was being bombarded and the fighting was really heavy, there were a lot of civilians trapped there and they didn't have running water. They were collecting rainwater. They were doing whatever it took, okay? They were siphoning gas from abandoned vehicles, okay? They were doing whatever they needed to do. Same thing with the Ukrainian military, okay? And I'll get more into that in a little bit here. Community is another one. A lot of preppers talk about community. Okay, what did the Ukrainians do? The Ukrainians did what any good prepper would do, and that's form a community, come together, strengthen numbers, okay? The Ukrainians came together. They didn't rob each other. They didn't go around marauding each other. They didn't loot from each other's stores. They realized that they're in the same boat, okay? Whether you're rich, poor, criminal, or not, you know, you're in the same boat, okay, as everybody else, okay? Whether you're a millionaire or whether you work at a grocery store bagging groceries, it doesn't matter. Your country is being invaded, and everybody came together, and that's critical from a preparedness point of view. You want to come together with your community, okay, because there's always strength in numbers. And if we're talking about SHTF here in the United States, the biggest threat would obviously be marauders, big, you know, groups of bad guys that are going to come around and loot and things like that. Foreign invasion is unlikely, but it's always a possibility. But when you come together with your neighbors and you form a community, that can make a huge difference in terms of your security, okay? And not just security, but helping each other out, okay? Your neighbor might be a doctor, and if you get injured, you know, your neighbor might be able to help you, okay? Or, you know, your neighbors might not own any firearms, but you do, and you're a good shooter, and you might be able to pull security while they do other things, okay? So community is critical, and the Ukrainians showed that they were able to come together in this tragic situation. Now, another thing too is how the Ukrainians were improvising bomb shelters, and this is something that I talk about a lot as far as like nuclear war goes. Really shown a very good ability to protect themselves from bombing. They go into basements, they go into metro stations to protect themselves, and that's just fantastic. That's exactly what you want to do in any kind of nuclear war or any kind of aerial bombardment. You want to go into a metro station, you want to go into a deep basement, and many Ukrainians were actually living in their basements for weeks on end. In some of these towns like Mariupol, there were people that didn't even go outside for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They were hunkered down in their basement for 2 to 3 weeks because the fighting and the shelling was so intense. They had all their supplies in the basement and they were living down there. Same thing in the metro stations, the tunnels, the trains and everything, okay? So, you know, they mastered being able to hide from aerial bombardment. And that's really important as a prepper. You know, you have to be able to identify a good bomb shelter if we're talking about nuclear war survival. Another thing too is, you know, cruelty, okay? Never underestimate how cruel human beings can be. We've seen in this war the level of cruelty that the Russian military, you know, has shown, and the lengths that they've gone to try to break the back of the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians have still resisted. But the Russians have been, you know, resorting to all kinds of dirty tricks, committing war crimes, you know, rape, murder, There was a video that was just circulating of a Ukrainian POW that was just gunned down for no reason by Russian troops. They were, pillaging, going into Ukrainian houses and eating all their food, living in their houses, making a mess, destroying things, raping, pillaging, all kinds of stuff, shooting civilians in the back. I mean, we know about it. So never underestimate the capability of human beings to be cruel, okay? Never underestimate that, okay? Human beings are capable of extreme cruelty, okay? Another big one is underground resistance. During the war, a lot of Ukrainian civilians formed underground resistance, movements and groups. They were collecting information for the Ukrainian army. They were taking notes of where they saw occupation forces and their behavior, and they were reporting it to the Ukrainian army. This is critical in any kind of occupation. Now, here in the United States, we're not going to be most likely invaded by a foreign country, but you never know. But, if we're talking about some kind of entity that would turn on us, okay, like if, let's say, there was martial law and we had some kind of tyrannical leader, and he went crazy and he turned the military on our own, on us, civilians. This is something that would be huge, is being able to collect information on occupation forces, and that's what the Ukrainians did. They also fed and housed Ukrainian soldiers, okay? They were providing housing for them when the Ukrainian soldiers were on missions. They would, go into Ukrainian houses and the people would take care of them and stuff like that, shelter them and so on, give them food. Also, they would help basically in any way possible, okay? And an underground resistance is critical in any kind of guerrilla war. If a country is occupied, the partisans that are actually fighting against the occupation forces are not going to succeed if they don't have an underground resistance that's supporting them, okay? They need that support structure from the civilian population. If they don't have that support structure, they're not going to succeed, okay? And in Ukraine, probably 95% of the civilians support the Ukrainian army and what they're doing. So they were able to get information for the Ukrainian army. They were able to feed and house Ukrainian soldiers. This is like textbook guerrilla warfare stuff. If you read like the U.S. Army Guerrilla Warfare Manual, it talks about that. Okay, this is like textbook. The Ukrainians are basically doing everything right. As far as like a guerrilla war or being occupied, they're doing everything the right way. Another thing too is that, even some of the Ukrainian civilians actually launched ambushes on the Russian military. So this is going into the next thing, which is like sabotaging. Okay, if your country is being occupied, or it might not be an occupation like we think, like if, let's say, the military turned on us or something like that, sabotage can play a huge role. Okay, partisan attacks, attacking rail lines, attacking bases, things like that. It made a huge difference, okay? So the Ukrainian partisans played a huge role, and also in Belarus too. I was also even watching a video of Ukrainian civilians that would actually ambush Russian soldiers just randomly in the cities and towns that they were occupying. I was watching a video about this bar where Russian soldiers would, drink at. It was an occupied area, and I forget where in Ukraine, but the bartender and the owner of the bar, they kind of played along with it. They gave the Russians whatever they wanted to drink. The Russians would demand, give me alcohol. They were very violent and forceful. And they would play along with it, and then what they would do is they would wait for the Russian soldiers to get drunk, and when they would leave the bar, they would ambush them with a knife and stab them to death. And they did that several times. Okay, so that's where the underground resistance is critical. But sabotaging can have a huge effect if you're being if you're being occupied by a superior force that you can't fight, conventionally one-on-one on a battlefield. Guerrilla warfare plays a huge role. Now, if we're thinking about on the tactical level, the Ukrainian military showed a lot of adaptability. They were able to repurpose vehicles to do certain things that they weren't made to do. They turned like RAV-4s into troop transport vehicles and medical evacuation vehicles. They mounted machine guns on pickup trucks. I mean, they were just adapting as much as they could. They showed a tremendous amount of adaptability, and that's just, that's just the way you want to be in a SHTF situation. You're going to have to adapt. You can be as prepared as you want, but like I said, there's certain scenarios that are going to come up that you're not going to be prepared for, and you have to be able to adapt. So the Ukrainian military showed a tremendous amount of tactical adaptability, okay? Another thing, too, that we see in Ukraine is that small unit tactics are very successful, especially against a large conventional force, okay? The Ukrainians have mastered small unit tactics, okay? A lot of the Ukrainian units are very small. If you watch some of the YouTube channels that show the combat footage, like CivDiv, and there's a couple others out there, Americans that were in Ukraine, embedded with the Ukrainian Foreign Legion or embedded with Ukrainian forces. They have their GoPros, and you can see that they're not going through the countryside with huge platoons and all kinds of armored vehicles and massive amounts of air support. Okay, they're going in with 10 guys, max 20 guys, but most I've seen on average is like 5 to 10 guys. And they're raiding compounds, they're clearing out areas, they're gathering intel, they're doing reconnaissance on Russian positions. And those small unit tactics are very effective. They've been very effective against the Russians because the Russians don't know how to respond to that, because they're all about, big numbers and, blitzkrieging your enemy with massive amounts of artillery and huge platoons, with hundreds of guys, companies and stuff. And so, with the small units, it gives you a lot of flexibility. Number one, with a small unit, it's hard to be seen, okay, by any kind of enemy observers. If you're rolling around with 30 guys, 40, 50 guys, it's much easier to get seen versus if you have a small unit or 5 or 10 guys. It's much easier to get behind enemy lines and do different things. So they mastered the small unit tactics, and in Ukraine it's been a good test of the small units, and we can see that small units are very effective against larger units. Okay, we can see based on the war that small units can be very effective. So this is something to think about in SHTF. If you're dealing with a large group of marauders, like 100 guys or something like that, and you have maybe 5 guys on your side, don't get discouraged, because you might actually have the upper hand. Even though you only have 5 guys, you can hit your enemy from different sides. You can move, you can slip in and attack them when they least expect it, okay? And these are things you can't do with a huge group. So that's something positive for us preppers, okay? Because a lot of preppers think that they're going to be outnumbered and you need a huge group of guys, but you really don't. Even if you have 5 guys, you can do a lot with that. And in Ukraine, they proved it. Another interesting thing is the drone warfare and reconnaissance. The Ukrainians have mastered using drones not only for reconnaissance, but also to drop weapons, munitions on their enemies, okay? The Ukrainians are buying just, consumer grade drones, and they're putting, mortar shells or whatever, artillery shells. I don't know exactly what they put. They basically tie a mortar shell or a grenade or something like that to the drone, and then they fly it over like a trench or over like a tank, and then they just drop it on top of the enemy, and it's been working for the Ukrainians tremendously. So that's something to think about. In an SHTF situation, you may want to pick up a drone. With a drone, you can do a lot of intelligence gathering, a lot of surveillance. You can put that drone up in the air and you can see all around your location and see if there's any threats, see what's going on out there. And you're not going to be exposed if you go on foot and you have to do that recon on foot. You're exposed. Okay, you might get ambushed. There might be somebody waiting for you. But if you send a drone up, you can safely, look at an area and see what's going on. So drones, very interesting what's going on over there with the drones. And then finally, dispersal, okay? When Russia invaded Ukraine, the Ukrainians dispersed their military. And this is important for preppers to understand. You don't want to group up all your guys together in one centralized location, okay? Because that makes you vulnerable. You want to spread your guys out, okay? If we're talking about like a MAG, you have like your SHTF, response team, or your SHTF neighborhood watch, or your SHTF guerrilla, team, okay? You don't want to have like a centralized location, because anytime you have a centralized location, you can be found, okay? So if you have like a camp or some kind of centralized location, like a base basically, you want to reconsider that, because any enemy is going to look for that. They're going to try to find your camp, your base, okay? And so that's one way that you can be discovered. And also another way you can be snooped on. Somebody could, watch your camp or your location at night and try to get information. But it also makes you a target, because when you have all your guys in one area, all it takes is just, for you to be surrounded, and then that's it. You're screwed. All your guys are in one spot. Okay, and then you're subjected to enfilading fire. Okay, you don't want to be subjected to enfilading fire. What that means in enfilade is basically, the simplest way I can describe it is, if you're in an enfiladed position, that means that you're grouped together and your enemy can shoot at your group and destroy you. Okay, you don't want to be enfiladed. You want to be defilated. Okay, defilated is where you're kind of like spread out. So it's hard for your enemy to concentrate all their fire and destroy your whole group. And that's exactly what Ukraine did, is they defilated themselves. Okay, they spread out. There's no centralized bases that the Russians can hit with missiles. Okay, they've spread themselves out all over Ukraine. They're operating much like a guerrilla force. They don't have any centralized base. They're very dispersed, okay? And because of that, it's hard for the Russians to pinpoint their exact bases and strike them and take out a lot of Ukrainians in one strike. And so you want to do that too. If you have a MAG, like I said, you want to disperse yourself. You don't want to have a centralized location. Okay, I know it sounds difficult to pull off, and everybody wants to have that, bug out location that's heavily fortified and everybody can go to, but that also makes you a big target, okay? And all it takes is for a larger group than yours to surround your area and destroy you all, kill you all with enfilading fire. Okay, just imagine like a trench. Okay, let's say you have like 5 of your guys in a trench and you're my enemy, right? If I jump into that trench and you guys are all lined up in a straight line in that trench, all I have to do is take my rifle and just shoot at you guys, and you're all going to get killed because you're standing in a straight line and my firepower is going through all of you guys, okay? Because you're concentrated in a small area. But if you were perpendicular to me, okay, and perpendicular to my fire, now I have to shoot at you guys individually, okay? I have to shoot at you here, 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 here. You're not just concentrated in one area. So that's very important to understand if we're talking about SHTF tactics, okay? So that's pretty much it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps. Prepare, practice, and persevere.